I used all my savings to help my best friend cover her business losses after her startup failed. After my son went to college, our finances became tight, but my best friend was unwilling to pay me back. She and my husband tricked me into a hotel and ruthlessly turned against me. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself. Since you borrowed money from me, why do you still expect me to pay you back? You go ahead, and once you leave, I will take good care of your husband and child. I lay in a pool of blood, watching the two people in front of me with dazed expressions. In the blink of an eye, I returned to the day when my best friend came to borrow money. Alara, you're finally back. As soon as Serafina saw me, she immediately greeted me with a smile. You must be exhausted from work, right? I secretly glanced around the house, my gaze lingering on the messy sofa and Serafina's slightly flushed face. What brings you here? I avoided her hand and walked directly to the sofa. Serafina seemed a bit guilty but didn't notice the coldness in my tone. Thaddeus explained for her, saying, "Honey, I ran into Serafina on my way home from work and brought her along. She said she needed to talk to you. Serafina is my best friend, and she often comes to my house." I never expected that the two people I trusted the most had already betrayed me. Thinking about how they pushed me to the brink for money, the hatred in my heart is truly uncontrollable. I wish I could expose their false sincerity immediately. Just in the previous life today, Serafina came to my house crying about her failed business and the debts she owed. How could I heartlessly abandon her like that? Before she even mentioned it, I foolishly lent her the money. And what happened? 3 years later, when my son was about to study abroad and our family was short on funds, I had to ask Serafina for money. To my surprise, not only was she unwilling, but she also colluded with Thaddeus to trick me into a hotel, which led to my murder. Before I died, I asked her why. Serafina blamed me, saying that I had forced her. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself. Since you lent me the money, why should I pay you back? Go die. When you die, I will take good care of your husband and children. It was then that I realized how foolish I was. In this new life, how could I possibly let them succeed again? Just like in the previous life, Serafina started to cry as soon as she sat down. Alara, I really don't know what to do. I failed in my business and now I owe a huge amount of money. The shareholders said if I don't pay them back, they will sue me and send me to prison. What should I do? Boo-hoo! Serafina cried for a long time. When she saw I wasn't responding, she gave Thaddeus a look. Honey, it's not easy for Serafina either. After all, she's your friend. We can't just watch her go to prison. Thaddeus said with a righteous expression, we should help if we can. In our last life, we coordinated like this. I'll take out the money first. But I understand in my heart why Thaddeus is after my money. My parents left me an inheritance before they passed away, which is my premarital property that Thaddeus has no right to touch. Moreover, Thaddeus was also involved in that investment. If the money isn't enough, it won't just be Serafina going to prison, he won't escape either. The two of them naturally thought of me. I was so moved that I took Thaddeus's hand and said, Honey, you're really great. Could you help Serafina with this money? I really can't come up with that much. I feel a bit embarrassed as we continue. Where would I have any money? Thaddeus said eagerly. Didn't your parents leave you an inheritance? It's over 10 million. It's all gone? He was obviously anxious. Serafina, with tears in her eyes, took a deep breath and knelt in front of me. Alara, I beg you to help me. We've been good friends for so many years. How could you bear to let me go to jail? I will definitely pay this money back. I can write an IOU. Are we not the best of friends? I felt a pang in my heart. Serafina and I have been inseparable friends, together from kindergarten through university. My parents often joked, you two might as well share a husband. At that time, Serafina seriously said, Uncle and Aunt, I am Alara's good friend and will never do anything to hurt her. As long as she likes it, I'm willing to give everything to her. We have never argued in all these years. In a way, she feels like a family member to me, even though we aren't related by blood. Therefore, her betrayal hurts me more deeply than Thaddeus's. In that moment, I almost couldn't help but ask. When I saw the resentment in Serafina's eyes, I suddenly woke up. It's not that I don't want to help you. I truly don't have any money right now. The money was already locked in a fixed deposit before I returned. No one should think about touching it. When Serafina heard that I had locked the money in a fixed deposit, she was stunned and looked very unhappy. After all, whenever she brought it up before, I never refused. So this time she wasn't worried about going to jail for not filling the gap. She didn't expect I would give her a big surprise. Alara, don't worry. Thaddeus just said that he would cover this money for me. Thaddeus didn't even realize what this had to do with me. I don't have any money. I said in surprise. Honey, did you forget? You still have a house left by your parents, right? It could sell for 5 to 6 million. Serafina suddenly turned to Thaddeus, her eyes showing a hint of resentment. I see. Thaddeus seems to have never told Serafina the truth. Thinking back to the last time, they were like fire and water in front of me. Every time they met, they would argue fiercely and couldn't stand each other. If I hadn't mediated between them, they wouldn't even have been able to sit down and eat together. So I trusted them completely, even if they were both on the same bed. I thought they were just chatting. I didn't expect they were actually very close already. Thaddeus was a bit unhappy, but I still encouraged him. Serafina, don't worry, my husband said he would help you. He will definitely help you because you're my best friend. Hee, my wife is right. Thaddeus smiled awkwardly and said that the house might not be worth that much, it needs to sell first. How could it not sell? I immediately contacted a second-hand housing agent for Thaddeus, hoping to sell the house quickly. This house was a big bungalow left to Thaddeus by his parents, but we already have our own marital home, so we've never lived there. It's understandable that Serafina doesn't know about this. After Serafina left, Thaddeus's smile vanished instantly. Quickly contact the agent and tell them not to sell this house. When Serafina asks about it, just say the house is too old and can't be sold. You're being too serious. I was just making small talk. Thaddeus urged me, seeming anxious, afraid the house would be gone in a moment. His expression changed in an instant. I glanced at the phone that was on the call, confirming that Serafina could hear every word. I angrily said to him, Honey, how could you do this? Serafina is my good friend. How could you lie to her? Seeing me angry, Thaddeus quickly hugged me and comforted me, saying, Wife, think about it. If she can't repay the money, wouldn't we be wasting it? Besides, we have a son, our expenses aren't small. Under Thaddeus's persuasion, I started to waver. Serafina seemed very angry and quickly hung up the phone. I deliberately called back once to test her. Serafina, I just accidentally dialed the wrong number. You didn't hear anything, right? Serafina clearly seemed distracted. Huh? What call? I didn't see anything. That's good. I hung up the phone and couldn't help but smile slightly. Not long after, Thaddeus's phone started vibrating wildly. He instinctively flipped his phone over and placed it on the table. Why aren't you answering? I asked. Is there something I can't hear? Thaddeus accidentally knocked over his cup and was busy cleaning it up, looking quite flustered. What are you talking about? Just a sales call. I smiled slightly, nodded, and then went back to the bedroom. Not long after I walked away, Thaddeus nervously answered the phone. Soon after, he made an excuse of working overtime at the company and hurriedly left the house. I seriously recalled the memories of 2 lifetimes. Based on my understanding of Serafina, she might have an argument with Thaddeus. However, it shouldn't escalate to the point of a falling out. There must be further plans. Thaddeus returned home late at night with bruises and scratches on his mouth, explaining that he had fallen. I quickly pinched my thigh to stop myself from laughing. Serafina is really ruthless. I don't understand what she sees in Thaddeus. He's irresponsible and so weak. If it weren't for our son, I would have divorced him long ago. After Thaddeus fell asleep at night, I quietly opened my phone. After so many years of marriage, I have always trusted him and never checked his phone. The password was non-existent, so I could easily unlock it. On the screen in front of me were his chat records with Serafina. As I swiped up, the endless chat records sent a chill down my spine. They have been together since our son was born. I can't believe I was so foolishly kept in the dark for over 10 years. This is just great, Thaddeus said. All right, baby, don't be mad. In a few days, Serafina will be on a business trip, and our son will still be at school. You can come to my house, and I'll make it up to you properly. Serafina, that's what you said. I'll begrudgingly forgive you. Serafina, It's all Alara's fault for locking the money in a fixed deposit. Doesn't she think it through? Thaddeus, don't worry, she definitely won't know. I have a way to make her willing to tell me. Serafina, what do you mean? What are you planning to do? Thaddeus said, if she doesn't understand, then it's just heh. I glared at Thaddeus, who was sleeping like a pig, and bit my teeth together to suppress my anger. I backed up the records to my phone and put Thaddeus's phone back in its place. After lying back down, I really couldn't help it and kicked him. The scream at midnight broke the silence. Honey, I'm sorry. I dreamt that you betrayed me, so I unconsciously kicked you. Thaddeus had a big bump on his head, and I felt very guilty, quickly apologizing. But I was thinking, why didn't I kick harder just now? Thaddeus, who originally wanted to scold me, swallowed his words and looked at me with a face full of affection. What are you talking about? How could I betray you when I love you so much? I shyly rushed into his arms, successfully masking the resentment in my heart. What? You're not going on a business trip? Thaddeus was so happy to hear that I wasn't going on a business trip that he almost shouted. Yeah, I felt this job was too tiring, so I just resigned. I said a bit aggrieved. Honey, you will support me, right? Thaddeus looked upset, blaming me for not discussing it with him. Although the salary at home is high, most of the expenses are covered by me. Otherwise, how could Thaddeus afford to support Serafina? But when he heard about my resignation, he became especially angry. You said before that you would support me. Were you just lying? Fine, then let's get a divorce. I said this out of spite, started packing my bags, and wanted to see how Thaddeus would react. Upon hearing divorce, Thaddeus hurriedly tried to persuade me not to leave, even giving me his supplementary card, which made me stop. The resignation is real. A company contacted me and offered me double the salary, but I told them I would start later. I just told Thaddeus about my resignation, and then Serafina came over. Alara, why did you resign? It's not easy to find a job right now. Serafina looked concerned and then asked me if I had already found a new job. No. I just don't want to work anymore. Anyway, my husband will take care of me, so why should I exhaust myself? I smiled at Serafina and said, see, as soon as I mentioned resigning, Thaddeus immediately gave me the supplementary card. I deliberately ignored the jealousy in Serafina's eyes and continued to suggest, let's go shopping. I haven't shopped in a long time. That day when I was shopping, I didn't blink. If I liked something, I just said, swipe the card. Serafina felt very upset but still had to smile with me. Thinking about it, every penny I spent must seem like it belonged to her, right? Thaddeus and Serafina sat quietly for a while, perhaps discussing something. I guessed correctly. Serafina hurriedly came back. To be precise, she brought a group of burly debt collectors with her. As soon as the door opened, Serafina rushed into my arms, clutching my clothes and telling those outside that this is my friend. She is very wealthy and will definitely help. She looked very scared, like a frightened little rabbit, with red eyes. If this were before, I would have felt heartbroken. Now, I just coldly watched this farce. Thaddeus saw that I didn't react, so he had no choice but to step forward and ask that group what they were here for. Only then did I realize they were here to collect a debt. It turns out Serafina not only lost money in her business but also borrowed from loan sharks. She thought if she made money, she could pay it back quickly. Unexpectedly, after giving so much, she got nothing in return. It was truly not worth the cost. I quickly thought that the debt collection must be real, and Serafina had deliberately come to me to cry for help. Alara, I beg you to help me. These people will really kill me. I am your best friend. I saw Thaddeus with a pained expression. If he is so heartbroken, why not sell the house left by his parents? To put it bluntly, men are always a bit selfish. I pulled Serafina away, clearly not wanting to get involved in this matter. Serafina, it's only right to repay debts, and I can't help you with this. As soon as I made my stance clear, a burly man with a buzz cut spoke up. Is this your so-called good friend? Seems like there's nothing impressive about him. How about this? Since you don't have money to explain to the higher-ups, spend a night with me, and I'll consider it interest. As soon as I said that, a few people behind the buzz-cut man showed smug smiles. Serafina was extremely angry, seemingly unable to understand how I suddenly became like this. She gritted her teeth, ran to the balcony, and cried in despair. I absolutely cannot go with you. If you come any closer, I will jump off from here. It's truly surprising to hear such words directed at me. Alara, I always thought our relationship wasn't measured by money, but now that I'm in trouble, you're just standing there watching. I'm really disappointed in you. In fact, part of me secretly hoped Serafina would really jump. This is the second floor. Jumping down won't kill you. I kindly reminded her, and Serafina was so scared she couldn't speak, her eyes wide open. Thaddeus could no longer hold back and got angry. Alara, that's your good friend. How could you say such things? Serafina cares about you so much. If you don't help her when she's in trouble, isn't that too heartless? Seeing my expression turn cold, Thaddeus's tone softened a bit. You can't be too selfish. If something really happens to Serafina, you might regret it. Regret? I do have some regrets, regretting that I didn't see their true colors sooner. I've been played for a fool for over 10 years. Serafina climbed up to the balcony, looking very dejected. She certainly doesn't want to die. She's just morally pressuring me. I sighed, feeling as if I had been persuaded. Do you really want me to help Serafina? Thaddeus instinctively glanced at Serafina, and the two exchanged a knowing look. Honey, I'm thinking of you. You only have this one good friend. I really have no money. I paused for a moment and then said, unless we sell our current house and add the one your parents left behind, we can barely cover the debt Serafina owes. However, this house isn't just mine. We can't sell our marital home just to save a friend, can we? As I said this, I felt conflicted inside, struggling between love and friendship. At this point, I left the decision to Thaddeus. Either sell the house or get nothing at all. The buzzcut guy seemed to see through my thoughts and joked, who would have thought your husband gets along so well with your best friend? How could it not be good? We're all sharing the same bed. Thaddeus was feeling very conflicted, and when he heard the buzzcut guy's joke, his expression changed instantly. What are you talking about? My husband is saying this for my sake. I quickly interjected, not wanting this fool to ruin my plan. The buzzcut guy looked at me with a confused expression, as if I didn't understand the situation, and he lazily urged, have you two come to an agreement yet? Can this money be repaid or not? It can. Thaddeus seems to have made up his mind, my dear. For you, we sold the house. I was moved to tears and couldn't help but say, you're so wonderful, my husband. Since she promised to help Serafina pay back the money, Serafina no longer felt hopeless and happily came down. The buzzcut guy said he would only give us 1 month. I roughly estimated and thought it was doable, so I nodded in agreement. After the person left, Serafina suddenly remembered something and started to vent to me. Alara, you should have said earlier that we were selling the house. I was humiliated by that group of people. You owe me a good compensation. I want to have a seafood feast to soothe my little heart that got scared today. By the way, hurry up and list the house on the trading website. I'm tired of those people pressuring me for money. She really acts as if it's all taken for granted. Calling her an ungrateful person wouldn't be an exaggeration. Thinking back, similar things have happened quite a few times before. When we were in school, Serafina would always come to me to complain about things she liked. For example, she would say, I really want Jay Chou's album, but my family's situation isn't as good as yours. I felt really sorry for her, so I gave her all the pocket money I had saved up for a month. When we got to college, Serafina could have applied to a better school, but she said she couldn't bear to be apart from me. We are good friends. Of course we should always be together. I was so touched that I foolishly took on Serafina's living expenses for 4 years. Looking back now, it seems like her kindness had some ulterior motive. I'm a bit tired. You all go eat. I don't want to go. No matter how much I hate Serafina now, the feelings I had for her were genuine. In college, we participated in the debate team together, and there was one particularly interesting topic. If your best friend wanted to catch a mistress, would you go? I supported going, while Serafina opposed it. That was the only time she proactively conceded in a debate. I remember her saying, this time I have to concede. If I don't go when my best friend is catching a mistress, she'll come after me. Everyone knows we are the best of friends. Now this knife hurts me the most. Seeing that I was in a bad mood, Serafina didn't push me but instead pulled Thaddeus over to thank him properly. Honey, are you feeling unwell? Then I won't go after all. Thaddeus looked at me with concern. I forced a smile and said, it's fine, I just didn't rest well. You all go ahead. Seeing my slightly swollen eyes, Thaddeus believed me. As soon as the two left, I immediately contacted the divorce lawyer and sent over the chat records I had saved and the proof I found of their hotel stay. Now, I just wait for the show to begin. My son knew I was selling the house and rushed back before the match was over. Mom, you can't sell the house. He was sweating profusely, clearly having run back. I was a bit surprised. Didn't my son usually like Serafina? He got so agitated when I mentioned selling the house. No matter what, Mom, you can't lend $7.5 million to Serafina. My son was stomping his feet in frustration, seemingly wanting to say a lot but hesitating. I was taken aback, only paying attention to what my son said after that. I only told my son that I was selling the house, but I didn't say it was to lend money to Serafina. Suddenly, some absurd thoughts popped into my mind. Why can't we lend money to Aunt Serafina? Don't you usually like her the most? As I said this, my fingers trembled slightly, not knowing what I was afraid of. I heard that sentence from my son. Serafina won't pay back this money. She teamed up with Dad just to swindle your money. After saying that, my son cautiously looked up at me, seemingly worried that I wouldn't believe him. In this lifetime, my son could never know about Thaddeus's betrayal of the family, let alone the specific amount. $7,500,000. That's the number that cost me my life in the last life. But how could my child know? Emotions surged within me, so bitter that I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, I incredulously asked, Son, how do you know it's $7,500,000? My son widened his eyes and then burst into tears, throwing himself into my arms. I couldn't help but tremble along with him. It was only after I calmed my son's emotions that I understood what happened after my death. In my last life, after I passed away, Serafina and Thaddeus pretended that I died from an accidental fall. Moreover, the two of them provided each other with evidence of their alibis. My death was labeled as an accident. My son felt very down after learning this and didn't believe it was an accident. Not long after, Serafina moved into our house under the pretense of taking care of my son. She not only gained a good reputation but also inherited the assets I left behind. My son always felt something was off about Serafina and secretly installed listening devices at home. It was then he realized that at home, his dad and Serafina acted like strangers. However, the moment he left, the two would become as intimate as sparks colliding. After discovering their secret, my son began to suspect the cause of my death. Unfortunately, my son was still too young, often distracted, and was quickly noticed by Serafina. To prevent the truth from being revealed, Serafina advised Thaddeus to resolve the matter once and for all. It's fine, I'll give you another son. If he discovers anything, we're both done for. Thaddeus hesitated, deceiving his son to bring him home for his own future. Dad knows I'm allergic to beef. They ground the beef into a paste and mixed it into the food. Because my allergy was too severe and I didn't get treated in time, I ended up gone. My son's eyes were red, and I heard him clenching his fists and making squeaking sounds behind me. Why is this happening? They clearly already got the money. Why won't they even let my son go? This is truly heartless. Mom, you clearly know that Serafina and that man are no good. Why are you still helping them? My son doesn't understand. I smiled mysteriously and whispered a few words in my son's ear. He finally understood and gave me a thumbs up. All right, son, can you go back to the competition with peace of mind now? I patted my son's shoulder. This time I won't let them succeed. After sending my son to the station, I contacted the agency. When I said I wanted to sell the house, I really meant it. This house was bought by Thaddeus and me together. It is considered marital property. Even if we divorce, he is entitled to a share of this property. I hope they lose everything. A week later, someone came to me wanting to buy the house for cash. I told Serafina about this news, and she was very excited, praising me with many sweet words. Honey, the buyer said that since we are paying in full, he hopes the price can be a bit lower. During this time, I was busy with this house, while they didn't care at all. A bit lower is fine, no problem. I saw Thaddeus signing the sales agreement. To help Thaddeus relax, I specially arranged a dinner with the buyer. During the meal, Thaddeus suddenly had an idea. Mr. Chin, I have a house for sale. Would you like to buy it together? The price is negotiable. The man referred to as Mr. Chin instinctively glanced at me. I nodded slightly. Mr. Chin readily agreed. Sure, just like that, the 2 houses were successfully sold. The buyers were very nice. They didn't rush us to hand over the keys, stating that they were buying the houses for investment so we could move out later. However, Thaddeus quickly became unhappy. He looked at the amount deposited in the bank card. His eyes widened in shock. "Honey, is this amount short? Quickly go talk to Mr. Chen. How come we only received 3 million for 2 houses? Thaddeus was so anxious that he didn't know what to do. At that moment, I took out the contract, thinking there was nothing strange about it. That's right, we were in a hurry to sell the house and had to sell it at a low price. Otherwise, why do you think they were willing to buy? When Thaddeus saw the numbers on the contract, his face instantly turned panicked, and he nearly fainted. He shouted, "Why didn't you tell me? If I had known it was so cheap, I definitely wouldn't have sold it." I innocently spread my hands and said, "I told you back then, it was you who agreed." Thaddeus realized he had suffered a huge loss. His face turned red, and his breathing became rapid. "Why are you so foolish? Quickly contact Mr. Chen and tell him we no longer plan to sell this house. The house has already been transferred. There's no room for regret." I didn't argue with Thaddeus. I just informed him of the situation. "He went abroad yesterday, and I can't reach him." Thaddeus didn't believe this situation and made several calls himself, but all of them were powered off. He sat on the sofa, frustrated, and remained silent for a long time. Suddenly, he looked up at me, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "Alara, are you doing this on purpose? Are you intentionally selling it at a low price to someone else? You seem to be waking up, but how could I ever admit that?" Faced with my husband's suspicions, I decided to retort more passionately, raising my voice, my face full of grievance. "Thaddeus, what do you mean by that? I've been working hard during this time, and you actually think of me like this? Why would I intentionally lower the price? This house was bought with my money. You clearly want to be the good guy, but you don't care about the consequences. I haven't even settled the score with you yet." He squinted his eyes, showing suspicion. "I remember you weren't really into Serafina before. Why are you so enthusiastic about her now? Is there something going on between you two?" As soon as I asked, he fell silent. Thaddeus dared not accuse me anymore. Now that my money is in my hands, if I throw a fit, it won't be good for him at all. He could only lower his head to apologize to me. 2 million is fine. Just transfer it to Serafina for emergency use. I quickly said, "No rush. Wait a moment. Of course, the money needs to be borrowed, but Serafina also needs to write a promissory note since there's your part involved." Thaddeus didn't dare refuse, fearing I might become suspicious. That night, I called Serafina over and had her write a promissory note for 7.5 million. Reluctantly, she complained that my attitude towards her wasn't as good as before. "With our relationship, you actually made me write a promissory note." After I kept the promissory note, I told her that my card limit was reached and I would have to wait until tomorrow to transfer the money. Just as Serafina was about to say something, she was glared back by Thaddeus this time. Early in the morning, Thaddeus urged me to transfer the money, really worried that I would have second thoughts. Under his watchful gaze, I transferred the money to his card. "Transfer the money to Serafina, so she remembers your kindness." Thaddeus didn't think much of it. Transferring to him was the same. I guess Thaddeus wasn't in a hurry to transfer the money to Serafina and slowly went to the police station. "Hello, I want to report a crime. I suspect my husband has been scammed. Can you help me freeze my husband's bank card first?" Thaddeus's card was frozen, and he had no idea why. At this moment, something unusual was happening at home. Just in time, my son, who had been out for a competition, returned and witnessed everything. As someone betrayed by her husband and best friend, it was naturally my turn to step in. I held my son, crying uncontrollably, while the neighbors, who loved the drama of catching a mistress, surrounded my house tightly. Seeing the situation exposed, Serafina simply let go. "Alara, so what if I stole your man? Why don't we share him together?" Hearing this, I was so shocked that I was left speechless. Her face really was as thick as a city wall. Thaddeus was shirtless, and a towel barely covered his last shred of dignity. "Why are you doing this to me?" I rushed over and grabbed Serafina's hair, pulling it hard. Thaddeus wouldn't let it go either. Each of us would get a slap, and no one would come out unscathed. "If we don't deal with the mistress now, when will we?" Thaddeus tried to resist but was tightly held by his son. The anger inside me finally erupted at this moment. After a while of commotion, someone worried it might escalate and called the police. The police finally arrived to separate us. I covered my face and cried bitterly. Who would blame a wife betrayed by her husband? Thaddeus's betrayal was undeniable with his son's testimony as evidence. The police just mediated. After all, this was merely a domestic dispute. We are getting a divorce. After calming down, I made this request. It's impossible. Thaddeus panicked, disregarding his pride, and directly knelt down to plead with me. Wife, I was wrong. Please don't divorce me. I'm really at fault. It's all Serafina's seduction. She wanted to thank me. I was just confused for a moment. This is my first time. Can you forgive me? I didn't expect Thaddeus to still be lying at this moment. After the divorce, not only will he have to split my assets, but he won't get a single cent from my parents' inheritance either. I never expected Thaddeus to agree to the divorce because my lawyer is already prepared to file a lawsuit at any time. It turns out that men really need to be pushed into a corner, to be honest. I threw the printed hotel records in front of Thaddeus. Just because others aren't angry, do you really think people are fools? You two have been in contact for a long time. I'm not blind. Let me tell you, don't even think about getting a single penny from me. As I said this, my son just handed me a glass of water. I cleared my throat and then spoke their last hope. Thaddeus, do you really think that $2 million will make its way to you? To be honest, you're not wrong. I intentionally sold the house at a low price, and your card has been frozen. As long as I file for divorce and reclaim all our marital assets, that $2 million might not even cover my losses. Be smart and leave quickly. Remember, this house has nothing to do with you anymore. After saying this, I felt particularly refreshing. Thaddeus, aren't you the one who values money the most? You must feel really uncomfortable after working hard and ending up with nothing, right? Thaddeus clenched his fists in anger, wanting to hit me, but was kicked by his son. My son truly lives up to his name. He has quite a bit of strength. Serafina suddenly understood and couldn't help but laugh. So, Ilera, you've known all along, right? Those who say there's a deadline are just making excuses, aren't they? I nodded, and her expression changed instantly, filled with rage. When did you find out? This time, I didn't say anything. I tidied up Thaddeus's things and threw everything away. Now, the matter between Thaddeus and Serafina has become a hot topic in the community. On the day of the hearing, just when everything was ready for a smooth judgment, Thaddeus suddenly pulled out a debt dispute contract. This money is what I and Ilera owed after we got married. It counts as marital property, and she is responsible for paying half. I finally understood why they had been so calm during this time. It turns out they had already prepared an escape route. The contract clearly stated that Thaddeus invested after marriage and owed a total of $15 million. So, does that mean I have to pay back $7.5 million in debt? Thaddeus glanced at me smugly and said, "Who told you to insist on a divorce? Regret it now?" I wasn't as panicked as he expected, but this did catch me off guard. Even if I were to recover the money Thaddeus spent on his infidelity during the marriage, I estimate I would still bear $5 million in debt. If they want me to help them solve this problem, that's impossible. Your Honor, we do not acknowledge this debt. According to marriage law, if the money borrowed by the husband is used for joint expenses, I, as the wife, do have a responsibility to bear it. However, I had no knowledge of this money at all. Moreover, I have been responsible for all the expenses during the marriage, and I have clear records of these expenditures over the years. It really shows that the lawyer I hired for a good amount of money is indeed worth it. I was wondering why the lawyer asked us to print out the bank statements before the hearing. After reviewing the evidence presented by the lawyer, the judge understood the truth of the matter and even showed some dissatisfaction towards Thaddeus. A man who relies on others and betrays his family during marriage is bound to be looked down upon. In court, my marriage with Thaddeus was declared terminated, and I would not have to bear any of his debts. We had joint assets worth $2 million, and I received 90% of that share, along with custody of our son. Thaddeus looked very grim at that moment. However, this was not the end. I immediately sued Serafina, demanding that she return all the marital assets to me. Serafina did not expect me to do this and immediately began to shout at me. "Ilera, why are you being so ruthless? Are you trying to drive me to death? We've been friends for so many years. You're really ungrateful. I shouldn't have been so sincere to you. You actually disregarded our friendship for a man. At this moment, I am too tired to argue with her. The evidence has been well prepared, and the judge accepted it immediately. Serafina has transformed from an audience member to a defendant. In the betrayal of a 16-year marriage, Thaddeus has transferred over $5 million to Serafina. This money has all been recovered. Serafina naturally has no money to repay, but that's okay. She has a house under her name, which can cover half of the amount. I never expected to get it all back. Her difficult days have just begun. Serafina's assets have been frozen. Now she not only owes me $2 million but also shares a debt of $7.5 million with me. The creditors learned that her assets were frozen and came knocking on her door. Serafina was terrified and packed her things overnight, trying to escape. But I was already prepared and stopped her with the creditors. She knew she had nowhere to retreat and was filled with regret. Alara, I was wrong. Can you, for the sake of our past friendship, let me have a way out? She fell to the ground, her eyes filled with regret. I feel that she isn't regretting betraying me, but rather lamenting why she didn't get rid of me sooner. A dog can never change its nature. Don't mention the past friendship. It's disgusting to hear. When you were good to me, wasn't it always to gain something from me? You can only blame yourself. Greed will ultimately lead to your own downfall. After all the trouble to get a man, why don't you like him now? Thaddeus rushed out from behind me, grabbing Serafina's head with eyes full of fury. This is too much. You did this to me and still want to leave? Everyone, Serafina is right here. Those in need of money, seize the opportunity. After saying that, I left. Before I left, I kindly told Thaddeus the truth. By the way, those 2 cheap houses were actually bought by my friend, and now they're under my name. Thaddeus was furious and vented all his anger on Serafina. I know those creditors didn't get paid, and a few people decided to send Serafina to the club. Wow, Serafina really takes good care of herself. She's almost 40, yet still looks like a girl in her early 20s. Thaddeus stared, not say anything. He wished Serafina could earn more money to pay off the debts. Thaddeus's betrayal of his family was posted online by a well-meaning person. After I intentionally reminded him, his company also noticed this matter. The outcome was that Thaddeus was fired. Without a job, what can a middle-aged IT guy do? He had no choice but to deliver takeout to make a living. As a result, he was recognized as the heartless man, and there were many complaints on the delivery platform. Unable to even deliver food, Thaddeus could only go work at a construction site. Having lived so comfortably, how could he possibly adapt to such hard work? Later, I stopped paying attention to Thaddeus, especially since my son ranked first in his grade again, and I promised to take him abroad for a trip this summer. If Thaddeus knew he had missed out on such an excellent son, he would probably regret it deeply. 3 years later, my son took the college entrance examination and successfully became the top science student. Thaddeus saw his son's interview on television and came looking for him again after 3 years. Son, I'm your dad. Don't you remember me? But his son responded coldly, and Thaddeus felt very hurt inside. Not to mention his son, even he could hardly recognize himself. His clothes were tattered, he looked pitifully thin, and the wrinkles on his face were as rough as tree bark. His son instinctively took a step back, shook his head, and said, "I don't have a dad like you." Thaddeus was struck hard, his one straight back instantly bent over. "You actually dare to come looking for Alara?" Serafina suddenly appeared, grabbed Thaddeus by the ear, and started scolding him. I was somewhat surprised that they were still together after all this time. Serafina has completely changed. Her face in her 40s no longer looks as young as before. In contrast, my complexion appears healthier and more vibrant, showing no signs of aging. I've been living well these past few years. Serafina's once proud appearance now pales in comparison to mine. She glanced at me and couldn't help but feel a sense of inferiority. She didn't dare to look at me again, dragging Thaddeus away while cursing. I understand that for them, this is more painful than death. This is the best form of revenge.